Welcome to...
Hey, great shot.
This is the Great Shot Podcast, a Cracked Racquets and Tennis Channel Network, Tennis Channel Podcast Network production. My name is Alex Gruskin. Look, part of the joy of doing these podcasts without a video camera is that when you screw up, you just get to delete it, or you have the magicians Daniel Westhoff or Max Fliegner cut it out for you later. For those of you watching on the video, we apologize for those technical difficulties. We had a little bit of microphone difficulties, but we have sorted those out. We are ready to go. And the person behind those microphone difficulties, we are glad to have him back. My guest on the Great Shot Podcast today, you may know him as a former Denison men's tennis superstar. You may also know him as the host of our Wednesday mini break podcast. I, of course, know him as James Jill Simone lookalike Foster McDonald. Jamie, hey, great shot. Welcome back to the show. How you doing on that side?
I don't know, that mic. That's a rough intro for me there. All I'll say is this. I did not change a thing from what I usually do. I don't know what happened. But anyway, glad that we're back and getting on a roll here. So let's get it going.
If anything, we added that white cord now behind your left ear. So I'm in. Beautiful. It's a good look. It's like you've got a black earring on the left ear, a white earring on the right ear. It's very feng shui.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's really all about the aesthetic. I actually muted myself and made you think there was stuff going on just so I could look like this.
No, you were just like, Alex, you need a few warm-up reps before we rock and roll. And I always appreciate that. But for our listeners who were tuning in earlier, they have heard this before. But for our listeners on the podcast who are getting it in that format, we are obviously well aware with so much going on in the tennis world. The Mini Break podcast has been keeping you guys hopefully up to date on all of those things. We had an incredible Masters result in Shanghai. Obviously, Daniil Medvedev, Stefanos Tsitsipas, Alex Zverev, Matteo Berrettini all making the semifinals. That's the sort of next-gen result we at Cracked Racquets love to see. Mm-hmm. And so between Coco Gauff winning her first WTA title, Challengers event going on, we've obviously got the ITA All-American event going on as well. There's been a ton of tennis going on in the world, but now that it's going to slow down a little bit, at least, we've had some time to reflect. We're happy to get back in the video game. We get that rhythm going again. We wanted to keep our Great Shot Podcast listeners happy, keep you guys satisfied, give you something to listen to each and every week. So what we are going to be doing moving forward, a series we are very excited to get started today, a best of the 2010s decade podcast, with the year being 2019. 2020 is the next year. This is the end of the decade. This is this type of moment where you can reflect on 10 years of tennis and say, what did we see? What were the biggest takeaways? How did the game change? Who were the best players? What were the best matches, the best moments, the players who left some things on the table, the things we should be watching as we look towards the next decade? So that's what we're going to be doing over the next couple of weeks. We've got a bunch of different topics organized, a bunch of different things we're going to be looking at. As I mentioned, best matches, best players, we'll do funny ones as well, best rackets, best wardrobe, all of those different things, best American maybe as well, who's the player who suffered the most from injuries, all of those different topics to be explored on a later date. What we're going to be doing today, best seasons of the 2010s, and why I wanted to start with seasons in particular, looking back, you look at the accomplishments of the big four. And yes, when you look at this decade, it is a big four. Andy Murray, Roger Federer, Rafa Nadal, Novak Djokovic. Those were the guys who defined the ATP side of the decade. And so we're going to be looking at the best ATP seasons from the 2010s. A lot of the focus will obviously be on those guys. We're going to have some fun at the end, talk about the best next-gen season, maybe some guys who just missed the cut. But Jamie, you look at a guy like Daniil Medvedev, right, who's been so good since Wimbledon, has made, I think, 6 finals in a row now, won 4 titles, tied for the ATP lead on the year, somewhere around 57 wins. And it's like, compared to what these big four guys were ripping off earlier in the decade, that's nothing. And so with these big four guys accomplishing so much in so many different seasons, where I want to start, what was the criteria you looked at? What were the distinguishing features? See, if we weren't on video, we would have cut that out earlier. What were the distinguishing features for you as you look towards your best seasons of the decade?
Yeah, well, you just hit on one right there, amount of wins in a season. You're absolutely right. A guy like Medvedev putting up a ton of wins. Some of the ones we'll go through today, though, especially when you take into account how many tournaments they played, absurd, the amount of wins they're getting across the year, right? So that's a huge one. Then you look at like the big time results, right? So your Masters 1000, your year-end finals, and of course the Slams. The Slams, a huge centerpiece of this discussion. Once again, listeners, you'll see as we roll through the different options for you. But I think not only with wins, but wins and losses, that ratio, right? Because sure, you have some people who are just playing tons and tons and tons, but we're also going to go through a multiple where single-digit loss seasons, even though having a ridiculously high number of wins in a season. So that's a big one too. So all of those together is what I really threw in here.
A ton of wins and a ton of matches. That speaks to efficiency, right? That's the word. How efficient were you throughout the season? Some of these guys were winning double-digit titles, right? They're winning 10 titles in 15 events. I mean, that's a season. We saw an 11 title in 17 event season. We saw just some crazy results from these guys. So yeah, it's not only are you winning when you play, are you winning the majors, but it's are you winning week in, week out? How do you do at the Masters events? There's a number one season we'll talk about where a guy made all 8 finals of each of the Masters events he played, and that's undeniably excellent. Did you end the year number one? That's another factor. How dominant were you? Dominant enough over a 52-week stretch that you were deemed the best player according to our ranking system? You talked about the rivalries. It's not only best wins, it's how did you do against the other. And again, I'm going to stick with this, and I'm sure this is a topic we'll debate week in, week out as we do ATP side. How did you do against the other big 4 players, right? If you're Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, and Murray, you're obviously going to be playing them on the biggest stages. How did you fare against those top opponents? But yeah, it was splitting hairs. That's the crazy part, because some of these seasons are just so spectacular. And again, why I wanted to start with that Medvedev question, because he didn't make the list. Little sneaker. We came up, GSP, Great Shot Podcast, could also stand for it. I'm sorry we don't have a quack, but this isn't bad. Gruskin Shit Podcast. So we're going to be doing my rankings of the top 6 seasons. I know you agree with the 6. It may not be the same order, Jamie, but the biggest difference to you between these 6, and we kind of just talked about it, but these 6 seasons we're going to talk about and everything else.
I mean, I don't know. It's kind of hard. Looking over the decade, some of them get lost in the shuffle, because it's nice that we get a time right now here at the end of 2019 to sit back and look. Because right now, at least when I was thinking at it generally, I was kind of like, oh, there's been a lot of good seasons. And then you get down into the dirt of it, and it's just like, wow, there is a clear separation, especially when you get into Djokovic and Nadal of the 2010s. They have set themselves apart, and you'll notice here they're repeat offenders in our list, because they have had so many seasons that deserve that sort of credit and discussion.
Through the 2010s, Djokovic ended with 15 Grand Slams. Nadal ended with 13. So, yeah, they are going to dominate this list. And we should also say, when we're looking in the criteria, we'll talk about honorable mentions at the end. But the 6 seasons we came up with, all big 4 seasons. And to me, it was important we included all 4, right? Because even though Federer won 15 of his 20 slams in the 2000s, undeniably a presence in this decade, one of the premier players. And in fact, that's where we want to start. Number 6 on this list is the one Roger Federer season I wanted to go with, the 2017 Roger Federer season. And let's start with, again, why this season from Roger? Well, as I mentioned, I think it's undeniable. We have to have a Federer season on this list, even though he never ended the year number 1, which is a crazy thing when I looked back in the 2010s. He did reach number 1 in 2018, which to me was partially off of the success that he had throughout 2017. I think in 2018, he defended his Australian Open title, and it's just like, okay, now that I've done that, with all the points I accumulated earlier in the year, I'm the number 1 player, because there's no NOVAK Djokovic run right now on the board. And so to me, that was a testament to his 2017 success. But it was tough, because you're going to look back on Roger Federer. The longevity, of course, is incredible. But in this decade, you were right from the get-go. Rafa Nadal and Novak Djokovic were the clear top 2 players. And so that's why it was tough to pick a Federer season.
Yeah, I mean, it really was. And the thing you got to think about too, at least it's interesting to me. You think back and you're like, wow, it's surprising, because you would think, the farther we go back in the 2010s, the more options you would have for Federer. But really, no, it was before that 2010 mark. And so to come out here and say 2017 Federer is the one that belongs seems a bit odd. When you think about it too, it really did feel like it came out of nowhere, right? Yeah. Because, Federer wasn't the guy we were expecting to just come out and have an incredible season. Yet that's exactly what he did. He started out 2017 so hot with that Australian Open and kept up the momentum throughout, really.
Yeah, so I'm really glad you said that, because that's why part of the reason I chose this season again. Federer 5 slams on the decade. He gets one of them at the 2010 Australian Open. He gets another one, 2012 Wimbledon, obviously the 2018 Australian Open, but gets 2 of them in this season. So that's category 1, right? Where do you win the most slams? It was the 2017 season. Yeah, but as you mentioned, coming off of that 2016 season where we only saw him in 2 of the year's slam, where he made a semifinal at the Aussie and semifinal at Wimbledon, where he didn't play the Olympics, something we all know, the one thing missing from his resume, a singles gold medal, so that he didn't play the event shows his health on the year. You look at his record that season, 21-7 on the year, by far the worst year of his career since maybe 2002, 2001. Like even before that, maybe even his worst season of the century up to that point. And he ended the year ranked number 16. So you're right. No one saw it coming. And then that big thing you mentioned, efficiency. Let's get into his season this year, from this year, because just staggering. At age 36, Roger Federer goes 54-5. So no, is that going to be as much as some of the seasons we get to later? No, and that's why it's a little lower on the list. But I think we can all agree, 54-5, remarkable. You talk about the efficiency, 7 titles in 12 events. So he shows up, he wins more than half of the events he's at. You look at his slam results. Again, wins the Aussie Open, wins Wimbledon, quarterfinals at the U.S. Open. And I'm not going to lie, I docked him a little bit because he didn't play the clay season. But I mean, just on surface, 7 titles, 2 slams, 7 of 12. That's an all-decade season.
Yeah, it is. And I understand your point with the clay, but it's also really interesting to me, too, that he just made that decision. He just made it for himself. He's like, yep, this is what's best. My team's thinking. And then comes back out and acts like it didn't happen. He came back out and was like, I am right back where I want to be. And then gets back. And, of course, you mentioned the Wimbledon. So, he plays the hard court and knows, clay's not what I'm doing. I don't need to waste my time. Gets back out. Still ends the season with over 50 wins, at 5 losses. So that's incredible.
And he made a Montreal final as well. I didn't throw this on the list, but that's the first Laver Cup year, and we all remember just how exciting that event was. You have to add to that as a bonus to Roger Federer's 2017. In terms of playing the Big Four, this was another knock. Why I feel like I'm so negative. I had to have a top 6 season, but why for me this one wasn't higher? I mean, he goes 4-0 against Nadal that year, right? That's incredible for him, something we hadn't seen before. He obviously goes on a run where he wins the Australian Open, loses Dubai round of 16, but then rattles off the Sunshine Double, Indian Wells and Miami Masters event back to back. 4-0 against Nadal is probably the best he's ever done in a season. But in context, again, 2017, we had a banged-up Novak Djokovic. We had very little to no Andy Murray. So he didn't play either of those guys during that season. And I'm not saying that should be a knock on Roger Federer because it's not his fault those guys weren't there. He's 36 years old at this point. Like, we're going to knock him for that. That's crazy. But it does matter in the context. It speaks to the fact that when given opportunity, given that, Zverev, Tsitsipas, Medvedev weren't, and probably still aren't, but at that point, especially 2017, weren't in their top form. They weren't top 10 players at that point, but he capitalized on opportunities. And to me, that's why it's his most impressive season, because he was so efficient, because he got the job done in a way no one expected.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so let's revisit that Big Four conversation a little bit. You give the context of Djokovic and Murray, absolutely fair. But I think you might be shying a little bit away from the Nadal piece of that, because you're going 4-0 against Nadal. That's huge. You'll see some of the other seasons that we talk about. I mean, a 4-0 record against the Big Four, the other members, that's insane. I mean, there are some that we're looking at here where you're basically going dead even with the Big Four, and it's still that impressive,
Yeah, and to be clear, a 4-0 against Rafa Nadal in a year where he won both the French Open and the U.S. Open. And by the way, we're not even going to mention Rafa's 2017 season on this list, but It was equally impressive. And for Federer to beat him 4 times on those hard courts in those scenarios, that's huge. You're absolutely right. But there were some questionable losses. And again, we're really picking hairs because these seasons were all so good. But another reason I docked him, he loses to Goffin in the World Tour semifinals. I really like when players end the year with the World Tour final. To me, it solidifies your spot. You're number 1 in the world.
I guess Nadal can't ever be in this, huh?
We'll save that for no. Sometimes there are exceptions.
Okay, all right.
Exactly. He loses to Tommy Haas in that weird match in Stuttgart. I think that was his first match back post not playing the clay, but you got to dock him there. And then he lost to Donskoy, Dubai round of 16 as well. So again, we're splitting hairs. Yeah, I mean the guy is 54-5, 7 of 12 events. I don't need to say that again, but I guess to me that he didn't end the year number 1. That I guess this is to close off the Roger Federer conversation. A, I guess, would you have picked a different season? And B, do you think it's fair to have this season this low on the list?
So, yes, I absolutely would have picked this season. At first, I want to say no, it should be higher. But then when you start comparing it to the other seasons that we're going to talk about, it's really hard to make a case to push up. Like, I don't really know where we're going to push up in this. I will say the one thing that's pretty crazy, and maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, when you list out the worst losses, you're also listing out all of his losses, right? Because it's only 5 on the whole year. And it's weird that it's not like, oh, lost to Djokovic twice, right? Because that's what you're used to seeing. You're like, oh, yeah, you lost 5 in a year. Who'd you lose to? Oh, yeah, you lost to Nadal, you lost to Djokovic. But that's not the case at all here. And so whether that's a good or bad, maybe you knock it for him. Maybe it helps him in the big 4 category because it says, oh, you didn't lose that year. But at the same time, like you mentioned, the context of it, a banged up Djokovic and a Murray who really wasn't there. So ultimately, this is the Federer season I would have picked. Like we mentioned, this is the one where he got 2 of those slams, didn't play the clay. We can talk about it when we get into the other ones that we talk about, but I don't think I'd push it up that far yet.
Yeah, no, I think you have to dock him because, as you mentioned, he didn't play the clay. And, like, if you're going to skip a third of the season compared to what these other guys did throughout a 52-week period, like, you're going to get docked. And just real quick, the only Federer season that probably has an argument, 2012, where he goes semifinal, win, quarterfinals at the Slam. So that's still the usual excellence. He plays all but 3 Masters event, but goes win, third round, semifinal, win, semifinal. So, again, pretty good season, and then makes the final at the year-end tours there, silver medal in the Olympics. You look at his record that season, 71-12 overall, ends the year number 2. I mean, yeah, that's a really good season, but I think the hopefully and we want to hear from you listeners, by the way. That's why we're presenting these seasons. We want to hear your list. Would you go with a different one as well? That's part of the fun of a topic like this. But just the efficiency, that's what takes over for 2017. Yeah. I think that's why it's the defining season from Roger Federer. But you mentioned, is this justifiably ranked as the number 6 season of the decade? Let's get into our number 5, because we talked about Rafa Nadal being the dominating player. And for you, the record listeners, there are 6 seasons we're going to talk about. 2 of them from Novak Djokovic, 2 of them from Rafa Nadal, 1 from Andy Murray, 1 from Roger Federer. It feels like for Rafa, you really could have picked for the second season a bunch of different ones, because throughout this decade, he's had a ton of success. If slams is the thing you like, he won 2 of them in 2010. He won 2 of them in 2013. He won 2 of them in 2017. He won 2 of them in 2019. So, if that's, he won 3 of them in 2010. Excuse me. And by the way, sneaker, that we're going to be talking about that in a little bit. And in fact, that's actually the season I want to talk about now. So that it's interesting that slams is a lot of people's thing nowadays. It's a rings culture. How many NBA championships have you won? The rest doesn't matter. How are you doing at the Grand Slams? Doesn't matter that the next gen guys are winning Masters. None of them have broken through at the Slams. Even though Rafa won 3 Grand Slams in his 2010 season, for me, it's the number 5 season on this list. Jamie, your thoughts?
Again, it's hard. I think it's crazy when you think about the fact that he won 3, because that's like, wow, you win 3 out of 4, and it's still, you've got 4 above this. But the record too, when we talk about some of the other records, the other ones will stand above this one. 71-10. Let's not, of course, you have to bat an eye at that, right? It's like, this is insane. Like, right, you can't just say like, oh, casually, the guy went 71-10. That's not bad. But I mean, ultimately, we'll start comparing it to the other records. I don't want to give those away now, but I think that's one reason why you can justify putting this a little bit lower in the list, is because that win-loss, that efficiency just isn't quite as high. Even though he captured those Grand Slams, that's sort of the balancing act you gotta figure out with these rankings.
No, so right now I have in front of me the ATP Tour win-loss index, and it's over the past 52 weeks. But I'm going to switch it to year-to-date now, just so you guys can get a framework of how these guys' records compare to turn players. You look over the past 52 weeks. I mean, Rafa's 48-6, right? That's really good. Djokovic 54-10, Federer 57-11, Medvedev 66-21. But like, that's not freaking. I mean, are you telling me that's 71-10? No, 71-10 is unbelievable. That's mean over 52 stretch. You are playing a bunch. If you have 7 titles and 10 losses, that means you've played at least 17 events. So that means you're playing a full season. B, 71 wins means you're not just winning some events and losing at others. It means you're making deep runs at each and every event. And for me, 3 slams, obviously that probably is an obvious reason why it's ahead of Federer's 2017. But you look at just what Rafa did in 2010, the stretch he had on the clay. This is one of those years where, guess what? Rafa didn't lose on the clay. He wins Monte Carlo. He wins Rome. He wins the Madrid Masters event. And then he goes and wins the French Open. And anytime you put together a run like that, I mean, those were the types of seasons, and it's at the start of the decade. It was that type of season that we just got so accustomed to from Rafa on clay. It's why he's the greatest on the surface ever.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just sort of backing up when you set the stage for 2010 here, right? This is maybe one of the seasons that falls into a bit of a what if, because 2010, think about the way Nadal started this season. Loses in the quarters of the Australian Open, has to withdraw. I believe it was against Andy Murray, has to withdraw due to that, infamous knee injury that we've seen from Nadal. He withdraws in a slam, yet wins the 3 other ones, right? So that's a huge what if. You're thinking, look, this guy was already in the quarters of the Australian Open and was injured. What if he would have been healthy and could have gotten that? Then that makes this season skyrocket if he was able to get the calendar slam there, right? It's interesting when you think about it overall. I don't know. It's really hard when we start talking about some of the other seasons. For example, a Murray season after this one, I might throw some jabs and say maybe this 2010 one should go above that. But of course, you being you, put the Murray season above this one.
Yeah. So again, just to recap on why this season was so great before I start knocking it and why I have it a little lower on my list than some of the other ones. I mean, Rafa at this point, age 24, right? So this is prime, sexy, slim fitting, but ripped. I'm still probably wearing capris, but I'm starting to learn a little bit better. I'm definitely going sleeveless when the weather calls for it. The hair behind the headband is still thick.
Not thinning.
This is Rafa, who's winning the French Open and Wimbledon in the same year for the second time in his career. So that he's able to show that again on the grass was a big moment. But so all those things, Monte Carlo title, Rome title, Madrid, French Open, he wins Wimbledon. We look at the other titles he has that year. He wins the U.S. Open. He wins Tokyo, right? He makes 9 finals, wins 7 titles in 17 events. Now, Federer did 7 in 12, so you're like, oh, that's more efficient. Well, no, I think 7 in 17 events is more impressive given that the 17 is over the stretch of the season, given that Rafa took no time off, right? There was never an extended stretch of period where he sat out and rested the body. He was in it. Look, I mean, you look at his other notable results from the season. It's not like 2010. He only did one thing well. You look at how he did at the Masters events. Yeah, he wins those 3 on the clay, but he makes semifinals of Indian Wells, semifinals of the Miami Open. You want to hear his losses there, by the way? Semifinals of Indian Wells. Guess who he lost to?
Who did he lose to?
No. Come on, guess. It's 2010.
I don't know who he lost. Well, I can cheat. So
Ivan
we're looking
Lubicic,
at the same thing.
7-6 in the third. Loses to Andy Roddick 6-3 in the third in Miami. What a different time it was.
I know. What are we? Is this like the 90s? Like I'm hearing names I haven't thought about in a long time.
That's the fun of doing this exercise. Like, wow, I forgot about that guy. But look, there were some questionable losses. He suffers 10 on the season, loses early to Davydenko in the Doha final, loses to Murray in the Australian Open quarterfinals. That's fine. But he lost to Garcia Lopez, Bangkok semifinals. He loses to Meltzer, Shanghai round of 16, loses to Baghdadis, which at the time, not bad, Cincy quarterfinals. He won 3 majors, but again, when you start splitting hairs and look at the difference between this season and some of the other top ones, his most dominant stretch was on the clay. But other than that, it's not like he won multiple titles over a stretch of time, right? He won 4 in a row on the clay. He dominated that. Then he wins Wimbledon, but he didn't win any warm-up events. Then he wins the U.S. Open, but he didn't win any warm-up events. Then he wins Tokyo, but he didn't win the year-end finals. He didn't win the Shanghai Masters. He didn't win the Paris Masters. It was a great season from Rafa, propelled by the fact that he was the most dominant player on clay ever. That's 24-year-old Rafa on clay. Good luck beating him. But in terms of extended stretches, I think as we propel up this list, the guys will just be a little bit better.
I don't know. You'll probably catch some fight on me from your next one in particular. But I mean, look, it's hard for me to argue that when the guy still had over 70 wins and took 3 of the majors, right? One of which he withdrew from because he was injured. So that's where it gets a little hairy for me. I'd probably put this one a bit up in the list, especially because if you look at the big 4 and aggregate them all together, he comes out on top with a winning record: 1-1 against Fed, 2-2 against Murray, 2-0 against Djokovic.
Well, I'm glad you said that. That's not dominant. That's good, but you didn't
Well,
dominate his rivals that year.
I didn't say it was dominant against Murray.
But that's what I'm
Also, one
saying.
of those losses to Murray is the withdrawal.
Yeah, but Murray was up a couple sets. Don't hold it against. There's gonna be Andy Murray's gonna get a lot of love from me over the course of the.
I'm
just
not
wait till we
holding
get
it
to
against
best.
Murray. I'm saying that it's just not quite the same.
Yeah, but I'm saying to be one of the best seasons of the decade, you had to be the clear-cut number one guy. And I'm not saying Rafa wasn't, because he won 3 slams. He ended the year number 1, 71-10. We just talked about it.
Yeah,
but 1-1 against Fed, 2-2 against Murray, 2-0 against Djokovic. That's not crazy. Just wait till we move up this list. It gets crazy.
Okay, fair enough. I'll fight you on your next one, but go ahead.
All right. Well, this next one is for me. And look, I've been waiting for this moment, this type of podcast. I maybe even said in the group, hey, we're doing best of the decade, so I can talk a little bit about Andy Murray because I was so excited to see him back on the court again. But that's the next season I want to turn to. Now, people are so cliche now. It's a big 3. It's a big 4, whatever. You have your take. You're locked into it. That's fine. But you look at the course of the decade, and again, getting back to the slam counts throughout it from everyone. Djokovic won 15, Nadal won 13, Federer won 5, Murray won 3, Wawrinka won 3, but I think that's a different case, and Cilic won 1. But you look at the players who have ended the year number 1. There's only 3 of them. Novak Djokovic, Rafa Nadal, and Andy Murray. And I don't care how you value longevity. I don't care that that Federer's 2017 season came at age 36. When you end the year number 1, that's a season of the decade. So for me, that's why I think Andy Murray had to be included on this list, because if you succeed that well, there's no way you weren't the best player of, okay, points-wise, fine. Injuries, you can say whatever. But there's no way you weren't at least in consideration for this sort of thing. So now you look at the things Andy Murray did in this year, and I see you ready to jump on me, and that's half the fun of these video podcasts. But you just look at Andy Murray's season, and he aged 29. 71-10 was really impressive. He went 78-9 in this season. He ends the year ranked number 1. He wins 9 titles, makes 13 finals in 18 total events. So that efficiency mark, check mark. You look at his record against the Big 4 that year. This is where you're going to dock me because I didn't look at this beforehand. I blame myself. Didn't play Federer that season, and that was a year, as we mentioned, Federer's 2016. Why it made 2017 so impressive. Goes 1-1 against Rafa, but beats him on clay, which is a notable thing because he also won his first ever clay Masters title during this 2016 season. So we saw a jump from him there. He made the French Open final, I believe, in this season for the first time in his career. And then he goes 2-3 against Djokovic. And, I don't want to. All right, Djokovic 2015 is our number 1 season. We'll get to that. But to beat Djokovic to go 2-3 against that version of Novak Djokovic, it definitely meant something even more in that year. And it felt so good to see Andy Murray also defend his gold medal title, win another Wimbledon title to get number 3 after a couple of years hiatus from winning Grand Slams. He makes a couple of Slam finals during this season. I think 3 on the year. I mean, he was the player of the season, and 78-9 speaks for itself.
Yeah. So, out of this, it's just difficult. I don't even know where to start against this. I know that you've got a special place in your heart for Andy Murray, and I get it. The record is incredible. First of all, you mentioned it. You knew I was going to dock you on it. Look at the Big 4 records. Comes out with a losing record against the Big 4. Doesn't even have to play with a Federer because that Federer, as we mentioned, was pretty much non-existent. This was the year he ended, 16 in the world? So that's kind of the field you're working with. I think we also forget that 2016 was still coming, right after Djokovic had all of that dominance. And really the beginning of the 2016 season was not about Andy Murray. It was Djokovic. Djokovic captured the first 2. And so first 2 majors, that is. And so he takes the French and the Australian Open. Granted, I believe Murray was the finalist in both of those as well. So, of course, Andy Murray's knocking on the door. When I think about this season, though, I don't necessarily think best season of the decade. Really, where I think this is most impressive for Murray because he just didn't give up, right? He was right there in the conversation with Djokovic, but it wasn't until halfway through that year where he turned it on, overtook him, and then dominated that back half of the season.
So I'm glad you said this. This gets back to best run, in my opinion. And, you could throw in the Australian Open final, which he makes at the beginning of the season. Obviously, for him, that's a big moment in his career because he hadn't made he'd made a final in 2015, but before then, at the Australian Open, no finals since that 2013 Wimbledon title from him. But you look at his run of success. I mentioned Rafa. His best set of results happened in the clay. He went dominant throughout that run of 4 events, those 3 Masters and then the French Open. For Andy Murray, it started at Miami, or it started in Madrid, excuse me. But from there, it didn't stop for the full season. For the next 8 months, he was the best, top 2, if not the best player on tour. And you look at it, he gets to the Madrid Masters final. He loses there to Djokovic, wins his first Masters event on clay in Rome, makes the first French Open final of his career. In between the French Open and Wimbledon, doesn't take that time off, goes to London, wins the title. Okay, I got my first grass title. I'm good till Wimbledon. Well, what does he do at Wimbledon? He wins Wimbledon. Well, after Wimbledon, it's 2016. We all know the Olympics are in 2016. That's, it's once every 40 years. It's the equivalent of a slam, sort of, in that it's once every 4 years, so it's rarefied. Roger Federer doesn't have one, but he's not playing. Novak Djokovic doesn't have a gold medal, and that was something he's always wanted. We also, if you remember, that tournament had Rafa making the semifinals only to lose to an on-fire Argentinian, Juan Martín del Potro, playing in Brazil, eating up the atmosphere. The crowd was loving him. Just one of my favorite YouTube
so
rewatches.
Injured, by the way.
Yeah. Not at that point. He was that's why the run was so amazing, right? That's what made it so special. But so what does Andy Murray do? Defends his gold medal title and wins there. Now at that point, again, he had played all of the Masters events, played the Olympics and won it. Does he take Cincinnati off, which starts right after the Olympics? No, he plays it again, makes the final in Cincinnati. Yes, loses in the U.S. Open quarterfinals to Nishikori in 5. But does he stop the year there? Could have said, hey, great season, whatever, I'll rest up till the World Tour finals. No, continues to play the Asian stretch of the season, wins in Beijing, wins in Shanghai, doesn't wait till Paris, plays an event after Shanghai and wins in Vienna, wins in Paris, because, by the way, at that point he was like, I'm going for year-end number 1, and then clinches the ranking spot by winning the year-end tour finals, which, as I mentioned, is one of the things I like most when you win that final event, to clinch yourself the number 1 spot in the world. I don't know how that's an 8-month stretch, Jamie. That's the best stretch, extended time of tennis we've talked about thus far.
So besides the record you come out with here and ending world number 1, I'm not sure how you have this high on a list, because he comes out and wins 1 major. And I'm not sure. I have to agree. It looks like we just had a viewer come in. Hannah, thank you for defending me here, asking, how is this better than Rafa 2010? And I have to ask the same question. How in the world is this better? Besides that record, what are you talking about? Rafa wins 3 majors.
Okay, but Murray
how many does he win?
He wins 1 major, but he also wins an Olympic gold medal, which has to count for something. He's got fair, 2.
But
How many other tennis players have 2 Olympic gold medals in singles?
Rafa didn't have that chance in 2010, did he? Also,
that's not his fault. That's not Murray's fault. You can't hold that.
If you're comparing multiple things, you just said 2 gold medals. I don't think he had 2 gold medals in 2016. No. So if you want to start coming in and say Fed has 20 Grand Slams.
He did have 2 gold medals. 2016 was his 2nd gold medal. I'm saying
you can't compare things outside of the year if we're going with best season. Otherwise, I'm going to come in and say Fed has 20 Grand Slams.
But I'm saying it. Well, but the context of winning a 2nd gold medal as you're going into it, I mean, it's the same thing as Rafa. Rafa wins 3 in 2010. If he's got 15, 19. So if those are the first 3 of the decade minus 15, he goes into the decade with 4. No, that can't be right. The point is, for him to win those 3, so it was 5, 6, and 7, I guess, were those titles in 2010. Yeah, that mattered. But the Olympics 2016, because the Olympics is so rarefied, for Djokovic, it was an event he circled, right? And when Delpo beat him in the first round, it was a huge deal. When Delpo goes on to beat Nadal in the semifinals, an incredible 3rd set breaker. Big deal. For Murray to then go on and win a 2nd gold medal, knowing that he had 1 going in, but defends his title in the context of decade, that matters. That was a high-pressure moment for him, and he got that. Plus, there's the pressure of, it's a big 4, but is it really? Because Murray's never ended the year number 1, and he's got so many fewer slams than the other guys. Well, knock those out of the list as well, because he ended the year number 1. Now he still has many fewer slams than those other three. But this was his season. This was his of the decade where he said, I am the best player on tour. I think there's no denying he was the best player on the tour in 2016. I also think, again, Rafa won three slams in 2010. That's really cool. And that is a big deal. I agree with you. But the sustained success, it went from Madrid to the year-end finals. He was just either in finals or winning events, and that matters.
Yeah, look, you're clearly not going to budge on this. You're not going to convince me that one major win in a season is better than 3 that we saw from Nadal. Also, when Nadal withdrew from that first one with injury. You want to talk about success over the whole year, wins on 3 different surfaces. You're just not going to convince me of that. Nadal 2010 is better than this Murray season. I know you want to put Murray and this hurts you because you're so biased, but come on.
You're just wrong. I mean, his last 5 Masters, final, win, didn't play, final, win. I mean, this was he 78-9, 90% of his matches.
The first half of this year was Djokovic. That's also what you're forgetting. The whole year was not him.
Look, this whole list could have been Novak Djokovic seasons. I'm not disagreeing with you. I am disagreeing with you because 78-9 is so do you agree? Good. Okay, very good. Move on. You're right. We're both locked into our positions, but do you agree it's above the Federer 2017 because of the longevity?
Maybe still 1 slam. That's the difficult one.
I hate people like this who are just like, it's about the slams. That's all people remember. No, that's not all people remember.
It's not all about that.
What do you think Andy Murray's going to look back and be like, man, I got 3 slams. I was really good. Or be like, man, I was the number 1 player in the world. And he was.
Look, if at the end of the day, maybe you put Murray above Roger Federer in 2017, sure, that's probably fine. At the end of the day, though, if you're Federer, I think you have something to fall back on. You win 2 majors, and it's across a big stretch. He starts out the season red hot. Skips
all right,
out.
I don't want to let you talk yourself into saying 2017.
You don't want to let me talk? You don't want to let me talk? I've let you talk for the last hour and a half about some guy who won 1 major. Get out. Next.
I don't want to let you talk yourself. No, what I was going to say is I don't want to let you talk yourself into putting that Federer season over Murray. So I'm just going to take that. I'm not going to go on to the Nadal one as well.
Let's get to a serious
Yeah, I did say. So now comes the real fun in the top 3. And obviously we have not mentioned Novak Djokovic so far. We said we had 2 on the list of Novak Djokovic. How did we not mention him when we've gone through 3? Well, that's because Novak Djokovic has 2 of the top 3, right? That's because I think
fair.
When people accuse people of recency bias when they say Novak Djokovic is the greatest of all time, that's because over the past 10 years, it was the no-lay decade. And part of the fun, again, of going through this exercise was just looking at, oh, my God, he was that good in 2012. Like, oh, my God, he was that good in 2011. Oh, my God, he was that good in 2015. Like, how good is this guy? It was just unbelievable to see how good Novak Djokovic was throughout the decade. I really wanted to fit in all 4 players 1 season because I really think it speaks to the big 4 and they're owning the decade. And again, we'll talk about that later. Jamie, don't give me that face. Don't give me that face. But for Novak Djokovic, it's splitting hairs. It was tough. I think Rafa deserved the number 2 spot on this list for one of the seasons we're about to talk about. But for Novak Djokovic, the 2011 season, for people who don't remember, was his coming out party. At the time, Novak Djokovic, age 24, a guy who, to that point, had he won a slam? Yeah, you look for Novak Djokovic in his career. He had won that 2008 slam. He made the final at the U.S. Open to end 2010. He had made a bunch of quarterfinals and semifinals in between as well. But 2011 was the year he came alive. And for people who forgot, he won his first 43 matches. I mean, 2 of them came from withdrawal, but to go 43-0 to start a season, I mean, screw efficiency and longevity. 43-0 speaks for itself.
Yeah, he could have just stopped playing. We could still talk about that season. But, it's funny because Djokovic 2011 and Nadal 2010, a lot of similarities. Both 70 plus win seasons, both take 3 slams. I'm just saying there's some similarities there. And I think Djokovic deserves to be this high on the list, though. This was an incredible season. Of course, we'll get to the 2015 one we all know about and we love. But 43-0 to start.
No, Rafa Nadal 2010. Now you've woke the dragon. Rafa Nadal, sweet season. Semifinal, win, semifinal at the Masters. Last 3 Masters event. Quarterfinal, third round, didn't play. You look at his. We went through the. I'm just saying. I thought
you
I
don't
guess,
think let's just be
no,
objective
the
here. You
gap.
don't think there's some similarities here? Age
No, of course
24,
there's
both 70+ win seasons, both take 3-4 majors.
No, I thought Novak Djokovic's 2011 was significantly better because there
I
was
think
no
it's
stretch
above.
of time.
I
No,
think it's a level above.
because I think there's a big gap between season number 3 and season number 4. I got Andy Murray on the list. I'm happy with that. But Djokovic, Nadal, Djokovic, these last 3 seasons are just a cut above. They're arguably the 3 best seasons of all time. I agree with you. The difference is why I wouldn't put 2010 in the same breath from Rafa as this Djokovic season, because Djokovic went 43-0. It was from the start of the Australian Open through the clay. So that is half of the season. A half season sustained undefeated streak till, and spoiler when we get to best matches of the decade, till Roger Federer plays the best match of his career in the 2011 French Open semifinals and knocks off Djokovic. I mean, up to that point, he gave up gluten, right? And for people on the video, I put quotation marks because how giving up gluten allows you to go 43-0, beyond me. But I mean, that run, that's when we knew. That's when we said this guy is special. It's reminiscent. It's Daniil Medvedev's 23-year-old season on steroids, right? Because he wins 10 titles, 11 finals in 15 total events. Rafa didn't do that in 2017 or in 2010. Excuse me. Rafa won 7 titles in 17 events. Djokovic won 10 titles, made 11 finals in 15 total events. That's just,
It's insane. And the crazy thing, too, is you think about it, you talk about the dominance of the first half especially. You got to think about it, and this isn't to sort of, take away from the season. That means in the second half he goes, 27-6? And, of course, that's still very good, but compared to what we're talking about here, if you take away the 43-0 aspect, which, of course, you can't just throw that out the window. I'm just saying that the back half is significantly lesser than what we saw of how Djokovic started his 2011 season at age 24.
That is just incredible. That's so funny that he has that stretch of time, and it's like, yeah, but that doesn't really matter because he started out the season 43-0, and so
I literally said you can't throw it out the window.
I'm saying I agree with you, and it's crazy that you're just like, yeah, but he was 43-0 before, so who cares that he lost 6 times? Like it's just remarkable. And again, I talked about the stretch he had. It was sustained excellent from start to finish. Yes, he lost the French Open semifinals to Federer, but he rebounded by winning Wimbledon. He rebounded and sustained that and won his first U.S. Open title. Again, he beat Rafa twice on clay. In 2010, Rafa 2010 is so good. Rafa didn't lose a match on clay. Well, guess what? He lost twice to Djokovic on clay during the season. Djokovic beat him in Madrid. Djokovic beat him in Rome. You like record against the Big Four. This is the first time we see a dominant player against his rivals. Novak Djokovic 4-1 against Federer, 6-0 against Nadal, 2-1 against Murray. Way to go, Andy. You talk about his losses on the year. I listed all 6. He lost, again, that Federer match at the French Open. He lost to Delpo in Davis Cup. Lost 4 bad matches at the end of the season, and that would be the only place you knock him, right? That's why this isn't number 2 or number 1, is because he did have that little fumble at the end of the season where he lost Nishikori, Tsonga, Ferrer, Tipsarevic in Basel, Paris, and the ATP World Tour Finals. But to be that good for the first 10 months, I mean, another fun fact, you look at just what he did on the Masters, at the Masters that year, it was just crazy. He won Indian Wells, he won Miami, he won Madrid, he won Rome, he won Montreal. Like, he won 5 Masters in a row that he played. He didn't play in Monte Carlo. He makes the finals of Cincy, follows that up, wins the U.S. Open, doesn't play Shanghai, and as we mentioned, fumbled towards the end of the year. But that stretch, that first 9 months, arguably the best of the decade.
Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. I mean, the record speaks for itself. To be clear, this is a level above Nadal 2010. I'm saying it. I'm just saying it's funny. It's just a striking similarity that they were the same age, both had 70+ win, and took 3 of the 4 majors. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. There's a lot on paper that you'd say the same, but especially when you get to the Big 4 category, win-loss, that is a big separator. And when you get to the amount of just total events won, also a big separator. So Djokovic for sure, Djokovic 2011 for sure deserves to be at this spot in the ranking.
He won his first 7 events. How often can you say that? You haven't done that.
He should have just stopped. He should have just stopped. Like, yeah, I'm good.
Well, the reason, again, to distinguish why this is number 3 and not number 2 is because he did fumble at the end of the year. Four of his 6 losses came in the last, I think 3-4 events he played. And so that is what keeps you from being number 1 or number 2 on this list, because we get to our number 2 season and, we talk about Novak. I just want to, again, remind people how special that opening of the season was to see him go 43-0. You talk about the 2011 Australian Open and what he did there. He knocked off Berdych, Federer, and Murray all in straight sets in the quarterfinals, semifinals, and finals of the match. He dropped 1 set in the entire tournament, second round, to Ivan Dodig 7-6, which, by the way, that's hilarious.
Yeah, that is hilarious. Are you kidding me?
Of course, Dodig, number 81 at the time. And so maybe people should have just been serving and volleying against him. That's what we should have. But I mean, just a remarkable run. But now we starting to get to the heavyweights. These top 2 seasons, again, arguably number 1 and number 2 all time. And I haven't, I was born in 1995. Do I know the 80s, 70s, and 60s, even the 90s that well? Not enough to say that it's the best season of all time, but you can't argue that our number 2 season, Rafa Nadal's 2013 season, was not, one of the top 3 of the decade. You look for Rafa, age 27. So before we thought for the first time, are his knees creaky? But that's before that real stretch, or after, I guess, the first stretch, but before the second stretch. I feel like there's really been 3 Rafas. There's 3 phases. There was the young athlete who was like, wow, this guy can really beat Federer. Then there was the top, who was, hey, this is the guy. He just beat Federer at Wimbledon. Then it was, ooh, is Djokovic better than him? And then it's like, oh my God, at 34, he's still winning slams. This is ridiculous. But that's my way of saying Rafa's 2013 was really one of those peak Rafa seasons. You look at his results here. We talk about sustained excellence to separate these guys at the top. In 2013, Rafa goes 75-7, 10 titles, 14 finals in 17 events. So he lost 3 times. Of the 7 times he lost, only 3 of them were before a final. And you look for the context of those 3. And this is why he gets dinged down and not number 1, is because you forget. First of all, Rafa in 2013, he didn't play the Australian Open. Rafa in 2013, he lost first round to Steve Darcis, a blast from the past, in the first round of Wimbledon. He also lost to Djokovic 3 times in the Monte Carlo final, the Beijing final, and the World Tour final. He also lost to Ferrer and Delpo. But, I mean, the stretch of success he had from Sao Paulo to through the French Open, he lost once. He wins Acapulco. He wins Indian Wells. He wins Barcelona. He wins Madrid. He wins Rome. He wins the French Open. So, again, that's one of those I'm not losing on clay season from Rafa. He goes on, he loses first round Wimbledon, and that could have derailed his season. But no, he goes on to win the U.S. Open. I mean, that was like that second point. You're like, okay, this guy is still one of the top players in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting too. We're going to get into the major discussion in this one, but I mean, Nadal asserted himself not only in the majors, but just that win-loss is ridiculous. 75-7. Like, just stop and think about 75-7, right? And adding on top of that everything else. I feel like we could just have one where you just look at the record and that's it, right? And then you look and talk about what went into that, and it's just insane to sustain that across a season. He didn't have the Djokovic 43-0, but 75-7. I'll say it again. It's just absolutely insane. And unfortunate, this is one that I wish, just for my sake, maybe you say I put too much stake in it, I wish he had another major in this one just to make the argument even more solid,
Yeah, I get why you said it, but for Rafa that year, that was just one of those. He owned Federer. He goes 4-0 that season. He didn't play Andy Murray, but he goes 3-3 against Djokovic, beating him in the U.S. Open final, beating him in the Montreal semifinal. Keep in mind, this was after Djokovic's 2011, which he followed up with a very good 2012 as well. So one of the big storylines in 2013 this season for Rafa we're talking about was, will Djokovic ever beat him at the French Open? Well, for Djokovic that year, Rafa did lose once on the clay. I said earlier he didn't. He lost to Djokovic in the Monte Carlo final, right? So there was a little bit of tension going into that French Open. And then Rafa just did his thing. He does what Rafa does. He beats Novak Djokovic, one of the best matches of the decade, 9-7 in the 5th set of that semifinal that year, which was one of those moments. That was one of those, is Djokovic about to get over the hump, get his first French Open title, complete the career Grand Slam, put himself in the conversation already at that point, 2013, with a Federer, with a Nadal in terms of the all-timers. And I mean, I mean, for Rafa is just one of those vintage 6'4", 3'6", 6'1", 6'7", 9'7" performances. I mean, when you complete one of the all-time matches of the decade, you get a win there. When you have the run that he did, as I mentioned, the efficiency, 10 titles, but 14 finals in 17 events, the consistency of, again, he goes to Sao Paulo and wins, Acapulco and wins, Indian Wells and wins, Barcelona, Madrid, Rome, French Open, Rogers Cup, Cincy, U.S. Open. It was week in, week out. It was 52 weeks of excellence from Rafa. And that's why, to me, even though, yes, he doesn't play the Australian Open, which, fine, if you're a slave to the slams, I'll call it, and you want to ding him for only winning 2, that's your prerogative. But I just thought that was the season from Rafa where he fought off Djokovic, and he was like, no, I'm still the guy. Like, I am the guy on tour. There's no one like me.
Yeah, that in here. And funny, of course, the ones that we're talking about the most are going back and forth between Nadal, Djokovic, because truthfully, even when you take a step back from the individual seasons, these are the guys who dominated this era, right? So let's just keep that in the context too. They're having a battle of their own, just one-on-one here. Of course, Federer was in the mix. Of course, we talk about Murray in the mix there too. But like we've said, this is not when Federer was most dominant at all. Didn't in a single one of these years at number 1. And there's only one Federer season that came in here into play in the 2010s, and it was 2017 for us, right? So that context alone, the flipping back and forth and sort of the defending the honor and guard there is definitely a part of this. But as we move into the next one, I'm too excited to go to Djokovic 2015. Before we go there all the way, got to give a shout out to somebody as a viewer, Martin Collins. Thank you for listening. Of course, we're happy to see you in the viewership here. I got to tell you though, I'm still so caught up on the Gruskin giving me crap for the Nadal 2010 that it stings every time I say the word Nadal. I'm still thinking about that in my mind.
Okay.
But
so let's wrap up here real quick. Again, for Djokovic that season, Djokovic only won 1 slam. The other guy to win a slam in 2013, my guy Andy Murray at Wimbledon, where of course he beat Djokovic in the final. For Rafa that year, yeah, he lost first round, but to go 3-3 against Djokovic and beat him in the places he did, U.S. Open final, right? Djokovic probably a heavy favorite in that match. Well, Rafa got the job done, and honestly, he got the job relatively routinely done, 6-2, 3-6, 6-4, 6-1. So in context, to beat an on top of his game 2013, who must have been 26 years old, Novak Djokovic, to go 3-3 against him, he's right up there with the number 1 guy. So he's proving he's right as good as anyone. 4-0 against Federer. He doesn't play Andy Murray on this season. We'll end this, Rafa, here. Do you agree? Best season of the decade, or are you going to give the final bump to 2010?
No, it's difficult. I mean, I think when you think about the whole context, and especially when you go back to the efficiency and the win-loss and what you saw from Nadal, especially when you put into play what he did to the other guys in the Big Four, you probably got to give the edge to 2013. It's close, but I think you got to give the edge to 2013.
Yeah, I say 75. Yeah. No, the best is you're like 75-7, and you're like, well, but they're all 78-9 for Murray, and you were scoffing at that. But again, 10
no, the
titles.
Record isn't what I was scoffing at. The record was the most impressive part about that season.
Yeah, but 10 titles, 10 titles, 14 finals, 17 events speaks for itself. It's why it's number 2. But let's get to the number 1 season, the best season of the decade. And again, picking the best Novak Djokovic season of the decade is like for a parent to pick their favorite child. It's just like, it's tough. Like, you don't want to do it. We all have favorites. There's no denying it. So you'll do it under the gun, which is why we're going to do it here. But it's splitting hairs. I really love 2011. He's a 3-title guy, or 20 whatever is really nice. But the season you come back to, the season of the decade, that he put together a second season like this is why he's in the same breath, and why people can argue without you going, losing all your hair, going nuts, just thinking this guy's crazy, that he's the greatest of all time. Novak Djokovic's 2015 season, where at age 28, he puts together an 82-6 season. So again, 82, the most wins of the decade by any player. For people who like win percentages, 82-6 on a year, that's a 93% win percentage. He wins 11 titles and makes 15 finals in the 17 events he played. So only 2 events does he not make the finals. You look at the other notable things. At all 8 Masters events he played that year, and there are 9, so he didn't play them all, but at the 8 he played the final of all of them. He won 6 of those Masters events, the only player to ever win as many as 6 in a season. I mean, No. Did he start the year 43-0? No. But again, the things we have harped on all time long. So sustained excellent. His run there. He makes 8 finals in his 8 Masters events, wins 6 of them. We talk about year-end number 1. He ended the year number 1. You talk about winning the World Tour Finals. He didn't do that, but that's okay. You talk about just everything else he did this season, and then you get to the coup de grace, right? The best of it all. The 3 slam season. You like slams? Australian Open, Wimbledon, U.S. Open. He got all 3. He lost a brutal match, I believe, to Stan in the that season was when he lost to Stan in the French Open finals, right?
2015, yep.
Yeah, brutal. So he makes the finals of all 4 slam. Was Stan Wawrinka played a brilliant match in that final, and the Stan Djokovic best rivalries. When we talk about best rivalries of the decade, that'll be in the discussion. But I mean, again, to put together 2 Pantheon seasons in 1 decade is crazy. To put together 2 3-slam win seasons in a decade is crazy. But to go 82-6, 27-1 on slams at the year, 39-2 at Masters events on the year, best of all time. Okay, there's greatest of all time and best of all time. This is why I want to talk about it because actually, sorry, go ahead. I'll save that tangent for
Here we go. No, I was going to say we've got some comments going along with us here that I want to give you the chance to respond to. Martin in the viewership saying, got to go with Djokovic 2011 as the number 1, ushered in the age of seeking every edge, mental diet, etc. 10-1 versus Nadal and Roger. What is your response to that? Because I've got mine.
Yeah, so that's fair. So you want to go record against the Big Four. Let's go there first. Against Fed, 5-3 on the year, but he wins at the World Tour final. He wins at the U.S. Open final. He wins at the Wimbledon final. He wins at the Rome final, and he wins at the Indian Wells final. So he wins all 5. 5 of the 7 finals they play against each other. He loses at Dubai, at Cincy, and in the round robin of the ATP Tour finals. Well, that doesn't really matter. I was wrong. I said he didn't win the World Tour finals. He did win the World Tour finals this year, beating Rafa and Roger in those final 2 matches. But again, winning record. He goes 4-0 against Rafa that year and gets hit that valuable win at the French Open over Rafa, which he had never done before. You like beating Andy Murray. That seems to be something you're a fan of, Jamie. He goes 6-1 against Andy Murray in 2015, the year before Andy Murray has what I call the number 4 season of the decade. So that speaks to Andy Murray's level. I mean, if you throw out the Ivo Karlovic loss he had in the first week of the year in Doha in the quarterfinals, his losses came to Stan at the French, Murray in Montreal, and then he lost 3 times to Federer. And that's it. So he lost to Stan, Murray, and Federer. That's the standard of excellence. You're like,
this to me, we talked about this before, right? Like we were both in agreement that this is the number 1 season going in. I mean, like the other ones, of course, you can make great arguments about. Maybe you shuffle in the order. You're painting me as this anti-Murray guy just because I hurt your feelings. But realistically, this is the number 1 season. I mean, the guy gets 82 wins 3 of the 4 slams, and honestly, you're beating Nadal at the French. You're pretty close to calling that at the winning the French Open. Like this one was the incredible shock that he did not win Roland Garros, right? I think everyone was expecting like, oh, yes, here it is. He beats Nadal. He's earned it. This is his time. And then Wawrinka comes out and just, says no deal and beats him. And so unfortunate for Djokovic. Of course, this would be even a huge step above if he was able to get across the finish line and get that 4th slam. But regardless, this one was not very difficult for me. Maybe in your mind they were a little closer together. This one clearly separated as the number 1 for me.
Are you ready for this run?
Here we go.
Wins Australia, makes the Dubai final, wins Indian Wells, wins Miami, wins Monte Carlo, wins Rome, makes a French Open final, wins Wimbledon, makes a Montreal final, makes a Cincy final, wins the U.S. Open, wins Beijing, wins Shanghai, wins Paris, wins the World Tour finals.
What do you say? Yeah.
That's the game.
I don't know how you argue. Yeah, I don't know
congratulations.
How you argue against that one.
You are the world number 1. You're the best player in the world. You are the best season of the decade. Like a 28-year-old Novak Djokovic fits the model. That's when you're going to be physically, mentally in your prime. Those things match up. You saw that year. He took a jump mentally. He beat Nadal at the French Open. And no, he didn't win the French Open title. And I'm sure he kicks himself over that loss to Stan. But like, he was the guy. There's just no denying it. And
this was his year.
This is the best season, right?
Yeah, this is it. And it's interesting too. Of course, we talk about you
It's
and I.
better than Rafa's 2010, right?
Yeah, it is. You got to relax, man. Just because I hurt your feelings on Murray 2016. It's just insane what Djokovic was able to put together. I mean, it really is. Of course, you and I talked about this. We don't have the sort of prowess and knowledge of the 90s, 80s, 70s, 60s tennis, but you put this up against any that we've seen and any that we will probably see in the next couple decades, I don't see any of them touching this. You have an 80-plus win season, and you're taking 3 to 4 with the 4th in the finals. Like, I just don't know how you get close to that, honestly.
Again, to the fan who says there was a better season in the 80s or 70s on the ATP Tour, I say prove it. I'm happy to be proven wrong, but you cannot convince me that going 82-6, 82 wins, 82.
Also, and you think about in this era where he has to play against Nadal and Federer and Murray. If we're going big four just for you, no, I'm kidding. I had to. Hey,
Murray beat him at Montreal, saved him from the sweep. I
just had to throw you there.
Dude, how good do you think Ivo Karlovic is? Like, yeah, I beat him that year, 2015. Yeah, right. Please, DOA.
What's crazy too is if you could combine Djokovic 2015 with like the first part of 2016 and just stretch it out even longer. We talk about continued dominance, but no, for real, when you're talking about a calendar year, Djokovic 2015 is just insane, especially in the context of who he was and who he had to play against in sort of his competitive set for this. There's nothing like it.
I think that's where we have to leave it with Djokovic, is there was just nothing like that season. So just to give you listeners one last rundown of the top 6 seasons, and Jamie, I'm going to say higher or lower if you have it. 2017, Roger Federer.
You're good there.
Number 6. Number 5.
Where I'm going to hit you.
Number 5, 2010, Rafa Nadal.
Higher.
Number 4, 2016, Andy Murray.
Lower.
Number 3, 2011, Novak Djokovic.
Yeah, you're good there.
You could make a case it was better than the Rafa.
But I didn't. You could make a case to flip there.
I honestly didn't. Ooh, Jimmy Connors, 1974, according to Martin, went 99-4. I would like to see the context of that 99-4. How many majors were involved? Where were the losses? What were the losses? What did that look? If you got 99 wins, he's playing the West Bloomfield Township Sports Club Championship, because at that point you're like, just give me an appearance fee. No, I'm just kidding. Older listeners, old tennis was really legit. But
so sincere, so genuine.
Yeah.
No, I mean,
that wooden racket dropping shot was just so no, I'm just kidding. Yeah, it's just like, I mean, they're like, you can't travel to Australia. Planes don't do that yet. And you're like, oh, well, I'm not riding a boat there. Like, I'll just skip Australia this year. And like, again, Novak Djokovic was so good. And so, again, he could have had the top 2. You could argue 43-0 is the most impressive stretch of any player we talked about on this list. But Rafa 2013, number 2.
Yeah.
And then 2015, Djokovic.
That's the one that separates itself as number 1.
So biggest gaps. I know we're dwelling on this list, but biggest gaps, I would say there's a gap for sure between Federer and the top 5.
Close. I probably put it closer than you do, but yeah, sure.
4 and 5, similar. 2 and 3, 2 and 3. Then a jump, then 2 and 3.
Yeah.
And then a jump. And
the big gaps between me are there. The 2 and 3 separation, and then number 1, of course, at the very top. That's how I put it.
And to put it, just real quick to go through some honorable mentions. We talked a lot of Big Four there. It's funny because we try and avoid talking Big Four on the mini break.
It's kind of tough.
Yeah, which we just are like, there's so many other guys. We want to talk Jill Simone, right? And some other seasons. I wrote every Novak Djokovic season but 2017, and that's not a joke. It really isn't. You could have picked any of them. You could have picked Rafa 2017 or Rafa 2019, because if you love the slams, obviously, he got a couple of them in both of those seasons. Murray 2012, that's where he wins his first Olympic medal, makes that final at the Australian Open, and then wins his first slam at the U.S. Open over Djokovic. I think he made the Wimbledon final as well that year, and that was the I'm getting closer against Roger Federer, where he had the tears. Yeah, I remember it. I've seen it. I cried. And, we talked about Federer and why we went with 2017, but okay, you look at other guys who won a slam in this decade. Wawrinka with 3 slams, Cilic with 1, Did you feel that, Delpo's had his moments of flirtation, but I really thought there was a huge drop off between any of the seasons those guys have had and a Big Four season.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that you can throw Andy Murray's 2016 in the mix and get ridiculed, but not completely ridiculed. Like you agree he deserves a spot on the list.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, absolutely. You look at the record, you look at the fact that he was world number one. Granted, you talk about the context of who else was around him, how they were doing, but like, absolutely deserves to be more in the conversation than some of these other guys because it's tough. You can't not talk about these big guys. The amount of dominance that they've displayed and the level that they sustained, not only across these individual seasons, but across the last, I mean, if you extend it out like 15 years, even if you can go past the decade.
But let's focus on the decade because it's the best of the decade pod.
I'm saying the point being that these guys are so good that yes, they dominate the decade and some. Sure, we'll shorten it to the decade for right now, but it's just hard to include other guys in that conversation.
And this is the first time I'll say it in the series, but that's why it's a Big Four in a nutshell, because you can't talk about the 2010s. You can talk about how good Djokovic, Nadal, Federer were, but inevitably Murray's going to come up, and that he's always going to come up in the conversation. Yeah. And I think that's why it's a Big Four. And I just think the level, Stan won 3, but they were spread out. There was never an extended periods of dominance from Stan. You look at it, he never, I think, even got up to number 2 in the world. I think the highest he was ever at was number 3 in 2014. And that speaks to the fact that there are always 2 other guys there with him along the way. And you look at his records against those 4 guys, and obviously it speaks for itself. But the last exercise I wanted to do, because I want there to always be a little looking ahead at 2020 angle of all of these podcasts. We talked about the best seasons of the decade, the old guys, again, shout out to the Wawrinka, Berdich's, Chilic's, Nishikori's, Ferrer's, who would probably be the next tier of lists, right? That would be the next group who you start getting seasons from. Yeah. But the last exercise, next gen seasons of the decade. Now, it wasn't next gen in terms of you had to be under 21 to have a season to qualify, but we didn't include Dominic Thiem, who probably should have been included on this list for best non-Big Four season, but of the next gen guys. So we're going guys my age or younger. So that does include Daniil Medvedev, all the 96s and everything. Yeah. It came down to 2 seasons for me. Alex Zverev's 2017 and Daniil Medvedev's 2019. Now, I kind of want to set the scene for our listeners first, if that's all right, to give them some context, because we all know what Daniil Medvedev has done. You throw Shanghai into the mix now. He wins his 4th title of the season. He adds, I believe now, another, so I think he's at like 60 and 17 now on the year. When you talk about the wins he got this week, he wins, or maybe 59 and 17, excuse me, leads the ATP in terms of total titles. 4 titles in 17 means what? He's won 4 of his 21 events. He hasn't made as many finals as obviously those top seasons. That's why I didn't even come close to qualifying for a top 6 season. But you look at the run in particular he's had since Wimbledon, Djokovic-esque in his dominance, and I don't say that lightly, or Rafa on the clay-esque dominance, the sort of dominance 6-month stretch we talked about so much over that past exercise. Since Wimbledon, where he lost in the 3rd round to Goffin, he made the finals of the City Open and lost in 2 tiebreakers to Kyrgios. He loses in the final of Montreal to Nadal. He goes and wins Cincinnati, beats Djokovic after being a set and a breakdown. He goes and makes his first slam final ever at the U.S. Open. He, for some reason, plays in St. Petersburg and wins straight sets there. He then goes to Shanghai and wins every match in straight sets there to win another Masters title on the season. That's a very, I almost swore, but we're still on video. That is an incredible season on its own, right?
Yeah, it is. And I think one thing, too, when you talk about Medvedev, obviously what he's done,
I think the reason you got
it, it does feel sustainable. And it feels like there's a difference between what Zverev did in 2017, obviously, just because of the presence, especially in his second half that Medvedev has had. It hasn't just been like, oh, he showed up and like, wow. And granted, too, let's not talk lightly about the Zverev 2017, because when he did come onto the scene then, he did some very impressive things. I mean, look, he got up to number 3 in the world at the end of 2017, right? So this guy was up there, absolutely, and established himself as a name, and now he's there and he's sustaining that top 10 presence for what it's worth. But what Medvedev has been able to do and how he's been able to stand up against the biggest names in the game, it's just a level above. And the fact that we could have this conversation just after the U.S. Open, of course, but no, he's just kept playing and kept winning. And so that's just made it even better for us as viewers.
So you mentioned the jump that Alex Zverev made, ending the year at number 3. He started the year at hold on, I'll get to the Zverev thing in a second.
I think he ended at 4.
No,
right?
so he's for Medvedev this year. He started at number 16. You look at the live rankings right now. I mean, he's going to end right around number 4, number 3. Really, just depends how he does the home stretch. A little bit behind Novak, but he's right now number 4 in the live rankings. If he plays Paris, does well there, does well at the World Tour Finals, Federer is in sight for him. But you look at Alex Zverev's 2017. You mentioned the jump. He jumped that year from number 24 as high as number 3, ends the year number 4.
Yeah.
4 titles, really good for him. For losing for Daniil Medvedev. 4 in, I think it was 21 events, or now 4 in 22 events maybe. For Alex Zverev, he won 5 in 27 events. Wins 5 titles on the year. You look at the results he had and where he won his titles. They weren't just 250s. He wins in Munich, which I think that's a 500. He wins a Masters event on clay, the first of the young guys to break through at that level, which at the time was so significant, if you remember. And you have to keep in mind, Zverev in 2017, age 20, Daniil Medvedev this season, age 23, right? So there's that context as well. As I think Zverev turns 23 next season. I would be interesting to see how he does next season, to see how Daniil Medvedev did this past season. I'm sure that's something we're all monitoring. But he gets the Masters win in Rome. He goes to Washington, wins the City Open, another 500. And then he wins another Masters event, this time on a hard court in Montreal. Along the way, he beat, I believe, Roger Federer in that final. And, when you're 17, so he's 20 years old, playing that 2017 Roger Federer, who, by the way, as we just mentioned, was having one of the 6 best seasons of the decade. I mean, that was a monumental moment for him. It's part of the reason why he's one of the few guys, I think it's him, Djokovic, Nadal, who have winning records over Roger Federer in their career now. Zverev beat him again this week. But just that 2017 Alex Zverev, he was really, really good. I mean, when he reached number 3 in the world, it kind of felt like a fluke, right? Because there was no Djokovic, no Murray for the first time. And you're right about that. But so they both have 2 Masters titles, so Medvedev doesn't have that over him. The big thing is, what do you value more? That breakthrough from Zverev going from 24 to 3 and showing us, okay, this is what the future looked like, or Medvedev's sustained excellence over the back half plus the Slam final?
Yeah, I think that's the Slam final especially is where you got to give it to Medvedev. And when you think about, too, the people he's playing, right, you mentioned the context of Djokovic, Murray. We saw what Medvedev, how he was able to stand up against these big guys. And I think what's crazy, too, is Medvedev showed us how he can just win. He might not be in his A game. Physically, He might not be feeling that well, but he can win, and he can figure it out with multiple game styles, and he did it against top-tier names. And so I think that's why you got to give him the edge here.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Grigor Dimitrov won the 2017 year-end finals, right? I believe that was his year, because 2017 Jack Sock won Paris, so he qualified. Zverev did not do well in the year-end finals, beat Cilic in 3, but lost to Federer and Sock in 3. Actually, I guess given the context, that's pretty well. But so Medvedev still has a chance to top him there, right? Would it shock you if Daniil Medvedev won the year-end finals? Absolutely not. And
indoor hard? Are you kidding me?
So I agree. I think the level of tennis we've seen from Daniil, not only because it feels sustainable, but it just is at a higher level than we saw from Zverev in 2017 throughout it. But again, the age discrepancy. Zverev did it at 20. I love Alex Zverev like I love Andy Murray. That's going to be the new, for sure, hill I die on. Sure it's going to be the hill I die on, but we'll deal with that in the next decade. It's splitting hairs. I would say, though, so the guy we left out, and then I swear we'll wrap, because for you, an hour-plus pod it's like this is Halley's Comet. This is a rare Pokemon card that you got in the deck. It happens once in a lifetime, so be used
to it. Let it be clear that that's only because of you, not me.
It's to make up for the technical difficulties earlier, right? But the one we didn't include, Stefanos Tsitsipas this year, who had a great season. I don't know if he won a Masters event in Rome, but I think he made the final before losing to Rafa. He did all of these, all of the things you want to see in terms of checkpoints, and I think he's 21 years old this season. So in terms of age rise, right in that same age range. I feel like he still – I don't know. Would you put that season in the same category as these two?
Not in the same category, but it's an interesting conversation. He beats the big guys. That's a huge one, right? We just saw it very recently.
Beat Federer at a slam.
Yeah,
which
so
that matters.
That absolutely matters, right? So that's a huge thing for him. Generally, though, this conversation for me about Tsitsipas is more of making him a name for himself at the top, which is something that Zverev and Medvedev did, and then they did more. So I think that's why it's a little bit different. But Tsitsipas absolutely asserted himself as a guy who's going to be around. To me, it's just not at the same level, though.
FAA too soon. Dimmenauer probably a little too soon because it's happened at the 250s, but not the 500s and 1000s and beyond yet. But the reason I would say of the pack of Coric, Khachanov, Dimmenauer, Shapovalov, FAA, Berrettini, all of those guys, there's a drop. And then I would put Stefanos Tsitsipas' season much more in the Zverev, in the Daniil Medvedev basket. I would say those are the three guys at the end of the decade who, while FAA stood out for his own reason, he gets an asterisk. Those are the three guys who stood out the most in terms of young talent. The three best seasons produced from, because Zverev had a good 2018 too, and it's like that's the sort of excellence that you know 57 and 22 isn't 78 and 9. But at age 20, it's a pretty good preview to 78 and 9. It feels like that's possible, maybe.
The only record here you're sharing is the Murray 2016. Get out. Come on. It's not even the best one. Sorry. That's just clear bias.
Well, no, because I don't think 82 and 6, I'm never going to say that's possible.
Fair enough,
it's just like, would you be like, hey, any of these guys have showed they have the capability to hit an 82 and 6 level season? I would say no.
No, that's fair. Fair enough.
Yeah, so that's why I say Rafa's 2009. Well, ends here. Rafa's 2008 and 2009, which were clearly better than his 2010. Everyone knows it. But you look at his records on the season. I mean, did fairly well in terms of the slams. 2008, he wins 2 and makes semifinals on the hard court. 09, he
Nadal 08 and 09. Right?
No, he suffered because Nadal 08. It was his like 22-year-old season, right? In 08. So I'm just saying for comparison. In 2008, holy shit. I swear, holy shit. He goes 82 and 11. Ends the year number 1, wins 3 Masters, only fails to make it only loses before the quarterfinals at a Masters event once. Okay, that's a really I don't think anyone's had one of those seasons. So maybe there isn't that much precluding. But I guess I don't know. I guess we wrap it here. In terms of the level from the decade. They've pushed the boundaries, right? They have set the standard so high for the next generation in terms of what we expect from our best players year in, year out.
Yeah, absolutely they have. And maybe it's something that's unattainable. Maybe not. Maybe if they get out of the way, maybe we'll see something like that. But I don't know. I mean, it's something that the Big Four have set themselves. I mean, they've set a precedent. Maybe it can't be met. Maybe it can't be followed exactly like we would like it to. But, hey, that also makes it more special for the 2010s.
Feels I agree. It feels like we really watched the 3 best players play at their peak, if not close to it, during the 2010s, and that's what I think we're always going to remember this decade for. Is of course those 3 guys, Andy Murray as well, the Big Four, just dominating, raising the level of the game, the expectations for greatness so high, and that's again why we're doing this Best of the Decades episode series. If you like this topic, be rest assured we will be doing topics like this each and every week, every Sunday. Times vary depending on who the guests are, but it will be every Sunday throughout the rest of the season talking about that. So if you want to see us on video, go subscribe to our YouTube channel. Obviously, if you know on the podcast, these will be released as GSPs each week as well. It's not only this podcast, though. You want to know what's going on in this decade because we still got a couple of weeks left. Check out the Mini Break podcast where I know for Monday we'll be recapping Shanghai and the Medvedev title. We'll be recapping Coco Gauff's title. Maybe talk a little ITA All-Americans as well. All of those fun things. Check out Cracked Interviews. We've got a great interview from Vicky Duval. Her first solo interview. I felt left behind, but it's going to be a really fun one. So listeners, be on the lookout for that. Like, rate, subscribe, review, all of those things. Share them with your friends. Again, the Twitter accounts. You need the more instant updates. It's at Cracked Racquets, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. The website is crackedrackets.com. Jamie, any final thoughts before we wrap this bad boy up?
Well, for the people who are on the video here, I thought you were really trying to flex on me there and give me a Murray shot. You were pulling the sleeves up like crazy. I was like, wow, I'm getting scared. I
forgot we were on video. My bad.
I was like, I'll never argue with you again. I'm sorry, Alex. No, this has been a ton of fun.
I don't need to register these because they're not guns.
Classic. Yeah, that's fair. Put those away. This is disgusting. No, but for real, this has been a ton of fun. And honestly, just reminiscing through the 2010s is something, of course, as tennis nerds that we're going to inherently enjoy. But going in between them, really diving deep and seeing those exact results, remembering some of those great matches, that's what it's all about. And as we continue the best of the decade theme, that's really what I'm looking forward to, being able to go back and think on some of those great times.
And I think next week we should flip the script, do biggest disappointments of the decade, the guys who didn't get slams, or, the talented players.
Yeah,
Tomic,
the what ifs.
Donald Young, the what ifs, exactly. I say we'll flip gears next week, talk about those things. But again, we've got a ton of fun things planned for you guys in the future, so be on the lookout for that. Always have to give a shout out to the super producers, Max Flingner and Daniel Westoff, who have an F of a job to do and, iron out the technical difficulties in about 3 minutes. They stick with us for the next hour 20, no problems at all. So shout out to you guys, hundreds of thousands of dollars. But with that in mind, for our super producers, Max Flingner and Daniel Westoff, for the wonderful co-host, James, I look like Jill Simone Foster McDonald, and from our entire teams at both Cracked Racquets and the Tennis Channel Podcast Network, I'm your host, Alex Gruskin. Jamie, what do we tell our listeners?
Hey, great shot.
I honestly thought you were going to say that's the break. Well done. Win of the decade, and we will see you all next week. Thanks, everyone.